Okay, so basically this week, I think things have just gotten to the point where they're just out of control with this whole Trump madness nonsense, anti-liberal nonsense. I think it's just pretty clear at this point that the right is only interested in fighting with the center and the left, not just the left but also the center. Anything that criticizes Trump or the right wing is now just a basis for a gang war, essentially, between the different political factions. But I think it's not really any more clear than it is now when we start to talk about any political issue in the United States. The moment that anyone criticizes Donald Trump or right-wing conservative philosophy / politics, they are counterattacked for whatever faults they have, and also counterattacked for whatever faults they can be claimed against them. And it's just, and I don't see how people can say that Donald Trump is trying to lift up all Americans, as this one man has said in this tweet here. And then he's constantly attacking everybody, and he's constantly criticizing everybody. And then when you make the ultimate statement that, go back to where you came from, I mean, how is that in any way trying to work constructively with people? That's outright rejection, and that's just all there is to it. So the odd thing about, that line of attack is everyone comes from somewhere. I mean, no one's standing in line at Target that was born in line at Target. And for people to talk about go back to where you came from, it's just really ironic for someone to sit there and tell. I mean, who wants to hear that, first of all? Second thing is, if you're going to tell someone to go back to where they came from, look at yourself and figure out where you came from. Is that really where you came from? No. Go back to whatever home, you were raised in, whatever town you were raised in, whatever home you were raised in, whatever hospital you were born in. There's always someone that can tell you to go back somewhere too. If you have issues for someone somewhere and your solution is that you're going to tell them to go back to where they came from, that works both ways. Maybe this problem here is that you are not where you came from. But that doesn't ever seem to really, reach the minds of these people when they start talking this nonsense. And I think the real problem is there's so much that just isn't reaching their minds. I mean, first of all, I want to talk about some of the tweets in response to this whole issue with Cummings and now Sharpton that Trump at 3 o'clock in the morning has raised in his 43,000 tweets in his Twitter feed. Let's look at the right wing worse. I think the left and center ones are what's going to happen there. So let's look at the right wing ones, because I think the real issue is to look at the insanity of these Trump supporters. They're just nuts about what they say. Basically, here's one. America is born, God is great. Black people in Baltimore, including black journalists, have come to the defense of President Trump after he spoke on the conditions of the city. Yeah, defending Donald Trump on anything does not defend what he did here. I mean, there's a difference. It's just elastic logic that just covers what they want to cover and doesn't cover what they don't want to cover. You can't defend him about everything he's done and said. You can say he's defended him, but that doesn't mean he's defended everything he's done and said. On Saturday, Trump correctly blamed Cummings for the state of his district. How is it correct to blame a representative for the state of the district of Baltimore or anything? How does that make any sense that you're going to blame a representative for what's going on in Baltimore? He's just one guy there. Okay, you don't blame one guy for the drug war or the drug trade or the drug business that's going on in the United States, do you? So how do you blame one guy for what's going on in Baltimore? This is nonsense. I mean, that is just ridiculous to say that. CNN's decided that criticizing the squad, Elijah Cummings, Al Sharpton, anyone of color is racist. How do you justify saying that CNN has decided that? It's just an opinion. It's not even a sensible opinion. Let's use it as a strawman argument. That is a fantastic cover to have. No matter what you do, no one is able to criticize you due to your skin color. That sounds racist. I don't think that it makes any sense for anyone who's a white supporter of Donald Trump to say anything like that whatsoever. That's insane. So to me, it's just half the problem is just nonsense that's coming out in support of Trump. It's not just that what Trump says is crazy. It's also that what his supporters are saying is just insane. That's half the problem. And so I think what we have to do here, quite honestly, is we have to look not just at Trump, but the people who support him, and the people who argue against the people who criticize him. We have to look at that insanity also. And I think I'm going to take a couple of posts here for a couple of the comments and just post them. Here's another one. People like Cummings and Sharpton have long records of holding people down. President Trump wants to lift all Americans. See the difference? Yeah, we can see the difference. I think it's obvious that we can see the difference between Cummings and Sharpton and Donald Trump. We don't need someone to say, look at the difference. We all see the difference here. Okay, and if you honestly think that Donald Trump wants to lift up all Americans, you're out of your freaking mind. This is the same guy who's criticizing people left and right all over the country and then acting like they're the problem with this country, not him. That he and people like him are not the problem. That he and people like him are the solution. Donald Trump is the solution to poverty, like throwing gasoline on a fire is the solution to being hot. It's just crazy. If you're more concerned about living conditions for people illegally invading our country than people living in your rat-infested district, you must be Elijah Cummings. You're only responsible as real Donald Trump is racist. Look, he's a congressman. His responsibility as a U.S. congressman is to oversee the federal government and to write laws to improve the conditions of the country. It's his job to oversee the border and the Border Patrol. And let me tell you something, the Border Patrol doesn't have a lot of oversight. Border Patrol is one of the sneakiest, most powerful government organizations in this country. ICE, on the other hand, okay, when they go into a city or someplace where they don't have local support from the local police, they're essentially powerless. If they don't catch the person they have sitting out there, they can't really do anything about it. There's the whole thing with this standoff where there was a human chain formed around this illegal immigrant because people in the neighborhood didn't want ICE to deport him. I mean, that happened because ICE has no authority to actually go in and start breaking into people's houses and arresting them. It's that simple. The Border Patrol basically has no restrictions. And if they want to take a bunch of people, 40,000 or 50,000 people and put them in a little cube somewhere and hold them, there's very little that can actually be done to change that. And that's part of the reason why it's happened, why the Border Patrol has become such an issue. But so how is it that they evaluate the two and say that he has more concern for the border than for Baltimore? Where does that evaluation come from? Simply because he's involved with the border. He's just nuts talking. Just crazy. All right, but enough of that. Let's stop talking about Twitter and go back to the New York Post, which is the highly distilled insanity. So what I really want to talk about there is a couple of articles. One, before bashing Trump, European leaders need a history lesson. Yes, so Michael Goodwin, this is a noted crazy at the New York Post, has decided that European leaders have forgotten European history and should go back and study it again before they criticize Donald Trump. Because why? Because he said so. Because that's the main issue, is no one should ever criticize Donald Trump until they have solved all of their own problems. Okay, and they're beyond criticism by Donald Trump. Okay, like Donald Trump has solved all of his problems before he starts to criticize other people. No, it's just insane. the things that people say in this country just to duck criticism, legitimate criticism, is crazy. Now, I agree with you. It doesn't make sense to criticize everyone as racist just because they're complaining about something that minorities do. But by the same token, it doesn't make sense to say that everyone is hypocritical just because they criticize something that Donald Trump does. And this is the larger problem here, is we're not talking about anything in a constructive manner. It's just counter accusations, counter criticisms, counter complaints. And the number one person doing it is Donald Trump. The number one, he's the guy who's up at 3 o'clock in the morning tweeting about stuff. I don't know of any other rational person in this country who's up at 3 a.m. tweeting about politics. And I can't even say that that's rational. I mean, it's just completely nuts to be doing that. So to write, a newspaper article saying that European leaders need to, go learn their history before they criticize Donald Trump. All right, that's fine. You can say that. Does it make sense? No, it makes it on its face. It's just crazy to say things like that. Second thing is, okay, let's keep going. Trump is right about Baltimore, and the Democrats know it. Is he right about Baltimore? Is he? I don't know if he is, because when you start blaming what's going on in Baltimore on a single elected representative in the House, you're well off the beam of common sense. It just doesn't make sense. The real problem here is blaming the state of Baltimore on Elijah Cummings is a lot like blaming the state of New York City on Donald Trump. It's amazingly similar. As a matter of fact, you can start blaming a lot of things on Donald Trump, not just the state of Queens or New York City, but a lot of things on him. And of course, the first thing they would say is, no, you'd better go take care of your own place before you complain about us, or go back to where you came from. That's their immediate rebuttal. Not, okay, maybe you're right. Maybe there's things that we could change, or maybe there's things that we can improve. No, you need to go back to your own country if you don't like it. How is that constructive? How is it constructive? It's not constructive. Just as it's not constructive to sit here and talk about how the president blistered him on Twitter, called him out for raising hue and cry of the conditions of the Mexican border, because it's wrong for him to talk about the Mexican border when Baltimore is so bad. That's his defense. His defense is, you might not like my clothes, but your shoes are ugly. That's his defense. That's the way his mind works. Okay, is he's such a fucking elitist that he has to have absolutely nothing to criticize about the person who's criticizing him. Otherwise, the criticism is invalid. And even if they were beyond his criticism, he still would throw his trump card down and say, well, if you don't like it, go back to your own country. Go back to where you came from. Yeah, Baltimore has a lot of rats. Oh, wait, New York City doesn't have rats? Oh, Baltimore has a lot of crime. Oh, wait, New York City doesn't have crime? I mean, what is it that's really so much better about New York than Baltimore? Honestly, what is it that's so much better about Queens than Baltimore? Honestly, it's a shithole too. I mean, there's no question that New York City, for the most part, is a large fucking shithole. And to criticize Baltimore and say that it's his fault, how is that not even just insanely hypocritical? Aside from the fact that, as some Twitter user pointed out very astutely, hey, you know what? Baltimore is part of the United States. And you don't like it, maybe you should leave. You should go back to where the fuck you came from, which I guess, who knows exactly where Donald Trump came from. Did he come from Queens? Did he come from Germany? Did he come from Eastern Europe? Who knows really where he came from? Nobody knows. I mean, we just know where he says he came from. But then, obviously where somebody says they came from doesn't matter. It's just gotten to the point where things are just, we're never going to have any progress in this country as long as legitimate issues are rebuffed with counter complaints. If the first thing and the second and third and the last thing you do when somebody points out something about an issue is to attack that person because they're not perfect, how are you going to act constructively to solve these problems? It can't be done. And I don't think that it makes a lot of sense for people to point out racism because people don't really give a shit now. They're at this point where they don't care if they're racist. They don't give a shit if what they say is racist or what they look like is a racist. They don't give a fuck. At this point, all they care about is they don't like you. They only care about their inherent racism. They don't like you. They don't like what you're saying. They don't like what you're doing. That's all they care about. They don't care about how racist or bigoted or biased it is. They just care about the fact that you're a minority in a country where they don't want you to be there, in a state where they don't want you there. That's all they care about. It's now the problem is that the inherent racism in so many Americans is something they are proud of. And even if you do call it racist, even if you say it is racist, a lot of them will say, yeah, I'm racist, so what? You know, I don't care. I don't care what you say. I'm racist. So what? You're still black. You know, and that's what it's coming down to. They may not be calling you a nigger to your face. They may not be assaulting, you know, your heritage directly to your face, but they're still coming at it with this whole like funnel of shit, just dropping 1,700 different things into the funnel and pointing it at the person and criticizing them and saying the real answer is we just get rid of you. Okay. Now I have a counter proposal to this whole issue. Let's just imagine, instead of having this border crisis like it is now, that we have every 5 years or so a controlled immigration. That we say, okay, we have 350 million people in this country, okay? We can accept 5 to 10% coming across the border, okay? So that's 35 million people. I mean, 5% would be, 15, 17 million people. If we can't handle an influx of 20 million people every 5 years, which would be 4 million people a year in this country, what's the real problem? What's the real problem? The real problem is we just don't want them. It's the whole issue. It's not about security. It's not about safety. It's not about stopping drugs. We're not going to stop drugs, okay? It's just not happening. And we're certainly not going to stop drugs as long as a lot of white people are happy to buy drugs and a lot of white people are happy to sell drugs to the Latinos south of the border. A lot of white people are involved with gangs. That's not going to stop. I mean, corruption is a major problem. We have corruption in the military. We have corruption in the police. All these problems are already here with us, okay? We're not going to stop these problems by shutting the border. We're just going to put more pressure on the whole problem. So just say, okay, we'll let 2 million asylum seekers, people who actually want to come to the United States, they're coming in, they're willing to fill out the paperwork. Okay, we'll let them immigrate. 2 million a year. Okay, in 10 years that's 20, in 100 years that's 200. Okay, you're talking about numbers which are way down the road. Do we want to block off Latino immigration entirely or not? That is the real issue. That is the whole issue at this point. And if we can address that directly without counterattacks left and right, we might do something constructive. But if every time somebody points out a problem with this country, somebody else goes, oh, your place is a shithole, or your people are criminals, or your people need to go back to where they came from, it's essentially just throwing the problem back on them instead of solving the problem. Okay, we know that there will be massive economic forces driving people north into the United States. Okay, they are going to come here one way or the other. unless you machine gun them down at the border. And then they will find ways around the machine guns until you start blowing up all the trucks that come across the border. And they will find ways around, unless you start a war at the border, literally a war at the border. They're coming to the United States. The question is, are you going to deal with that constructively, or are you going to essentially start an ethnic war? And we're going to turn this into Israel and Palestine. It's a real issue.